Welcome to the Mystery Revealed podcast. This is the place where you want to be. I hope you are with us all along, for we are nearing the end. We are on the 9th episode and we are going to be bringing it down today. Today we will be putting some explanation to the contrast in the character of God in the Old Testament. We are putting things into perspective. We are naming names. We got the receipts and we are going down. So get the book, go and download it on Draft2 Digital so you can have a copy for yourself. It's a free copy, or you can go to Able Books for the audio version. So let's go. Let's recap. All right, we've seen the contrast in God and the things that he does in Genesis 1 and 2 creation accounts. We've also seen the contrast when he deals with the heroes of old. We also saw how he was exploiting individuals for selfish gain. We also saw that he created a problem to provide a solution. We saw the good and evil that comes from Genesis 2 and the perversions that come there, the darker themes. We went deeper into them to try and expose some of the wound that we might get the healing that we need at the end of the day. Let us tackle part of that healing. Today, we want to speak specifically to the lingering questions that we've been having from the beginning. How is it that God is good on one end and then good and evil in the other end? How does he get to play both parts? How does he reconcile that so that he is the God that we serve, so that he's a safe space for us? Because we cannot come to him when he's like this. So we have to find a way to biblically reconcile the character of God. Now, when we speak to the reconciliation of the character of God, we have to have a teaser. Here's your teaser for that day. Blow the trumpet. Yep, it's about Christmas. The side of God that is manipulative, narcissistic, psychopathic, cunning, rageful, disastrous in Genesis 2 and in the Old Testament, and some parts of the New Testament, is not Christ. Yeah, I know, I'm confusing, but here I am, and I'm saying it to your face. The destructive side of God, where we see him be cunning, destructive, serial killing, all this chaos, all this narcissism, all this psychopathic behavior that we see God being in the Old Testament is not Christ. Cue the music. So yes, we gave it a go. We opened this wound and we accorded all of it to God. It was God being the one responsible for all the disasters that we see in the Old Testament. It is there. There's evidence of it. As you could see, the verses were there. He instigated so much evil in the world. But I'm standing here today to say it was not the God that we serve. It was not Christ. But guess who it was? It was Lucifer. Isn't it strange that we do not necessarily get to see his works in the Old Testament, but we can see his character as it is being revealed over time? It is him. But because he uses a very good proxy system, he hides behind the sins and orchestrates all things for the destruction of mankind. So yes, it is Lucifer. Now watch, I'm going to give you some receipts, some stuff to take home, some things to consider. Now, in his quest to be like the Most High, as we read in Isaiah 14, I will be like the Most High. He established his kingdom of darkness from Genesis 2. If you can do it, I can do it too. Competition. Remember we spoke about competition when we spoke of the games in this life? It comes from him. He wanted to compete and be like God, because he saw how God was receiving the worship and he was envious of that. So we see that he establishes his kingdom in Genesis 2. And I bet you this kingdom was in Babylon, where all the filth that we read about in the word is originating. So he establishes his Garden of Eden Bay to compete with the creation in Genesis 1, which, according to my rich suspicion, the Genesis 1 Adam was at Canaan, where the children of Israel were going to. This is where God established his kingdom of light. This is where God established all the goodness in the world. He was working from this point to the rest of us, to the rest of the world. So he said, I will be like him. I will establish my own kingdom that will compete with your kingdom. I will try and make sure that my kingdom steps on yours to make itself great. So his kingdom was a provision of God's in every way. So Genesis 2 is just a perversion of Genesis 1, where you have grace. In Genesis 1, you have sin. It all feels good, but the repercussions are different. Grace is good all the way, but the sin has its problems. So he establishes something similar, but from the works of the flesh, something that brings death. So we see that provision there. So he went on to establish that, and he sought to destroy God's kingdom, that he may remain the supreme God over all creation. He contradicted God's purpose by visiting and diluting God's commands and the illnesses and the chaoses. So whenever God would visit his person, Noah in this instance was under grace, he also came to dilute and degrade. Or when the person was in the world in sin, he led them into more sin, then God would come in and save. So we see that the contradiction there is not within God himself, but it's because he had an intruder. The enemy was on the side. He was there planting his own seed. So whenever God would do good, he would do his own good on the side to dilute the factor and cause amalgamation, leading to chaos and condemnation. So we see that he started this. So Christ says in Matthew 13 when he speaks about the kingdom, he says there, the kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good seed in his field. But while everyone was sleeping, his enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat and went away. When the wheat sprouted and formed heads, then the weeds also appeared. So the enemy did this. When God sowed his seed of creation, he also sowed his seed of creation or formation or whatever it is that he was doing that didn't work out, because we know that in the flood it all went away, and then he came for God so that he could divide what God had brought. We see him coming into Noah because there was no more of his own creation. So he started the whole competition after God had done some creation. So Genesis 2 and the Old Covenant are the weeds that grow to compete with the wheat being the better covenant, which is of Christ. It has always been there. We know that people in the Old Testament, like David, they had the Spirit of God in them to do the things that the Spirit does in us today. So God has always been in the business of empowering his people. The covenant has always been in action, but it was inhibited, like Hannah, who couldn't give birth because the other woman was giving birth, because the flesh was leading. So we see that Peninnah was winning, so Hannah was held back. But when Christ came, Hannah started having more children because that was the time for grace to be seen. That was the establishment. But the kingdom has always been there. God has always been at work to restore what the enemy had destroyed. So he's responsible for creating Genesis 2. He's responsible for the death of Abel, for he incited Cain by refusing to accept his offering, and he accepted the offering from Abel. So that incited Cain into violence. He's responsible for that. He's responsible for the violence along that lineage because he marked Cain and he also marked Lamech. So because of that labeling, to say anyone who kills Cain will triple whatever punishment, that increased the violence within the lineage, which is the violence that we see at the end of the lineage at the flood. So he's responsible for that. He's responsible for the amalgamation of the sons of God coming from the lineage of Genesis 1, Adam. That lineage amalgamated with the lineage from Cain. So that amalgamation produced much violence, which led to the flood. He's responsible for the flood as well. He's the one that regretted because he really doesn't have foresight. He's not all-knowing. So he's the one that regretted and turned on his own creation to destroy. So he started that. He's responsible for Sodom and Gomorrah and all that filth that was happening there. And then he turned on his own subjects when they were out of control to destroy in anger. He's responsible for the Tower of Babel confusion, the pestilence, famine, sword that we see in the world and that we see in the world today, even in the New Testament. He's responsible for the sorcery in the case of Balaam, where Balaam was consulting divination. He's the one that was in that sorcery, responsible for it. He's responsible also for the choices in the leadership of Israel, the chopping and changing. He's responsible for that. He's responsible for what happens in Israel. He's the one that punishes Pharaoh with the plagues and ultimately trying to kill the rest of humanity when he tried to consume everyone through the destroyer. Even with the nations, the judging of the nations right before Christ came, he was responsible for that. That standoff between Israel and the Lord, that was him. He is the one that provided the conditional arrangements, which Israel couldn't do anymore. He wanted the tithes, he wanted the gold, he wanted all these things. He was the cunning one behind all the destruction, the corruption of Israel, and the punishment of nations. So we know that he plundered, we know that he killed, we know that he set up kings to bring them down. We know that he's the one that divorced Israel and gave them a certificate of divorce. It wasn't God. He's the one that hates us with a passion. It wasn't God. It was not Christ. It was the evil one. It was the enemy hiding behind his proxy system, making other people do the harm while he loves and scorns, while he's stimulated by the pain that we go through, the suffering that we go through. Even today, he does that. He's behind the scenes, playing the games. We are the puppets in this game where he is stimulated by our suffering and our pain. So we see that it is him. It will be him again that will turn against his subjects and destroy them in the fire in the end of the day. It is not God that will start the fire. He will burn his subjects. He will turn on them, and the subjects will turn on him as well. So that chaos, that violence, which he started, will come back to haunt him. For one who kills with the sword, one who kills with the sword will die of the sword. So we see that happening because of Lucifer. So now let me give you some biblical reasons why I say it's Lucifer. The first one is that he did not rebuke or punish Satan. Satan was allowed to run scot-free the entire time. When Achan's kids, who were innocent of any wrong, were killed just for the sins of their father. Consider that. The whole time, Lucifer was there. He did not rebuke Satan. Even when Satan was going for Job, it was not the Lord that said, look, my servant Job. It was Lucifer inciting violence on Job so that Satan would finish the job. So he was working hand in hand with Satan, just as God worked hand in hand with Christ. So we see that Satan was his evil arm and he was the good side of the formula. So he presented himself as a God who's good, yet he carried the evil in himself. So we see that through him, the devil was never rebuked. He was actually a foe, or is a friend of foe. No, foe is an enemy. So he was a friend that did his dirty work. So he's the one that made the serpent in Genesis 2. So the serpent was a cunning animal, but he inhabited that animal so that the animal could cause chaos. Just like he came into Peter, just like he came into Judas Iscariot. So he has a tendency of hiding behind the proxy so that the proxy could be in trouble and he runs scot-free. So we see that the enemy never rebuked Satan. Lucifer never rebuked Satan because he was his friend. But what we see in Christ is opposite. Christ rebukes Satan. Even when he saw him in Peter, he says, "Get thee behind me, Satan." He had no time for the enemy. The enemy was the enemy. He rebuked the enemy all the way. We also see him rebuking the enemy in Zechariah 3 when Lucifer brought Joshua, given the right to save Israel as a priest and as a king. And we hear there that the Lord is rebuking him to say, "Lucifer, I rebuke you. Satan, I rebuke you." Because what he was trying to do was to conditionally bond Joshua for the destruction of Joshua and the children of Israel. So Christ was rebuking him. How can one that is sinful save other sinful beings? But you can see that it was an incitement for more violence. It was not a good act. It looked like it was good, but it was not a good act. So Christ rebuked it. Because Christ has always seen this. He has always been on the lookout for Lucifer because he could see his evil ways, even when angels couldn't. That's why he was able to deceive everyone with good trading. The angels in heaven couldn't tell his position because he was acting good as the good party, giving out the commandments, the 10 commandments. Yes, that was him. He gave them out. You can tell there they have emblems of the God that we do not know. We do not serve a God that is jealous, a God that punishes the third and fourth generation. That is not us. So the commandments were given by angels. That's what the word says. So we see that he has a hand in that. Another evidence that we see is in 2 Samuel 24 verse 1. If you cross-reference 2 Samuel 24 verse 1 and 1 Chronicles 21 verse 1, there David is incited by, in one instance, the Lord, and in another instance by Satan, to do a census. Through the plague, he killed over 70,000 Israelites. So that incitement there is by the same agent. In one instance, he's called the Lord. In another instance, he's called Satan. So you can see there that the writer is trying to bring across the idea that there's something amiss in the midst of this. We need to take a closer look. The same agency in this instance is called Satan. In another instance, it's called the Lord, but it's doing evil. For David hadn't done anything wrong, but the anger of the Lord was aroused. For what good reason? Because the preceding chapters, we see David worshiping. He's in good spirits with God, but now the anger of the Lord is aroused. For what good reason? And then he goes on to incite, and then ultimately there's the punishment of over 70,000 people because of the census that David did. We also see evidence of the revelation of the character of Satan in the New Testament, where he is the instigator of the cycle of exploitation in the life of Christ. This cycle of exploitation that we see in other parts labeled as God's cycle of exploitation. We see it being done by Satan when Christ came on earth. During that revelation, we see that the cycle of exploitation is something that the devil does. So whomever is tagged Lord in the Old Testament and does the same cycle of exploitation has to be related to Satan because they're doing one and the same thing. We never saw Christ, not even once, exploiting his people. In fact, he would find the vulnerable and empower them to be better. He never exploited anyone in his ministry. So we never get to see God in Christ doing all the evil that we see in the Old Testament. But we do see the devil doing them in the New Testament, just as he did them under the umbrella of being the Lord. So the Israelites, for the longest time, were serving him thinking he was God. But he was a decoy. He was trying to get God's glory and attention away from him to himself. So we see that it happens in that way. And we also see that the works of the flesh, which we see in Genesis 2, are consistent with the works of the flesh that come from the devil in the New Testament. There's also that issue of the standoff, where in Malachi 3, he resigns from lordship, announces the coming of the Messiah, and assumes the accuser role, swift accuser of anyone that does wrong, which is who he really is. So he failed in his lordship. He couldn't attain what was supposed to be attained, what Christ attained. We know that Christ attained a good result because he sent out the 72 and they came back rejoicing because demons were under their authority. He rejoiced in the spirit and he said, Father, I thank you for this thing is working. Whatever authority he had was being used to give life. But when it came to Lucifer, his mission failed. None of it gave life. None of it was good. All of it had death in it. Hence the ministry of condemnation. This is like the story of Mordecai in the book of Esther. What we see in that book is that we can relate Mordecai to Christ, Esther to the Spirit, the king to God, and then Hamas. Do we say Hamas? Yes. Hamas is Lucifer, hidden there as a good guy, but behind the scenes working to get Mordecai into trouble. And ultimately what we see is that he gets into trouble and the king gets to execute him, shames him and executes him. So that story there is trying to expose what is happening behind the scenes, where Lucifer was hidden, trying to receive all the glory while he hides and puts everyone else in trouble. So all of the things that we have said in this account that are evil, even those that look good, those are for Lucifer. He is the good and evil agent. He works behind the scenes to confuse and cause chaos, harden people's hearts against God, so that we could see God as a tyrant, as the one that we should run from, instead of one we should run towards, because God is safe. So the question is then, why then are all these evil things in the Bible accorded to God? The simplest answer is this: God is ultimately responsible for all things that happen under his earth. It is him that created everything. Everything belongs to him. When you have children, you take responsibility for their rights and their wrongs. And God is responsible, ultimately responsible for everything. That's why he died, because he's the one that gets to repair the damage that was caused by his creation. Creation gone rogue. It was the devil, then it was us. So he then has to take responsibility for all of that. So God is responsible. That's number one. Number two, Christ, through the work that he did at Calvary, repaired all the damage that was caused from Genesis 2 up until the end of time. So Christ died for the worst of sins. Because he died for the worst of sins, there is no boast in our sins. There is no way we can think God is unjustified in what he has done. Why did he let the devil be? Why hasn't he killed him? God cannot do all these things because they're not part of his nature. All he knows is love. So because he knows love, he knows repair, he knows restoration. And so he restored everything that the enemy did, and he did it better. So because he did it better, then we cannot blame it. We cannot even hate the devil. We can only feel shame for him, because God has stripped him down to his bare minimums. He has left him for us to see that there really is nothing. He is just a coward that we should feel shame for. He needs salvation just like we do. He is a creation that has gone wrong just like we have gone wrong. So Christ pays for all of that, and he puts us in a position where we could see all these things that he has done. Our God is safe. He has no shade of turning. He only knows good. So whatever good that he does it for us. There is no evil in him. Why don't you consider this? Consider God as your solution. Consider God as your safe space, the place where you can run to. He's safe. None of the evil in the world is up to him. It is the enemy that has orchestrated this from the start. He hates us. He hates God. He wants to punish God through us. He wants us to see him as a tyrant, someone that is just out for blood. He's the one that's out for blood. He put the laws in so that there could be bloodshed, violation, division, discrimination. All the chaos in the world has been his cause because he's been a murderer from the beginning. He's always been there to kill. And we've seen a lot of blood over the years. We still see so much blood, so much famine, and so much pestilence and the sword in the world today because he's still actively trying to get people dead. The enemy did this, it is not God. Stay tuned for our last episode. I promise you, it will be good.